We have the privilege to have here a very special guest, Sara Sabry. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an incredibly difficult way. It's very difficult to define all the amazing things that you're doing and condense them in a single word. So the way we wanted to start this conversation is to ask you. How did it all start, and how did all your amazing experiences converged in one place?
No, of course. I mean, thank you so much for having me. And my background is a little bit broad. And I think it kind of aligns with everything that's happening here with XPANSE. I started my journey as a mechanical engineer. I was always curious about how things worked, about the world around me. And I got into mechanical engineering, focused on mechatronics, was working in robotics for a little bit, worked on a Formula 3 car actually for a bit, and then did my master's in biomedical engineering, where I did research in stem cells, worked on organoids, and then worked on robotic surgery, where it's actually specifically using logic reasoning to increase autonomy in surgery, so it was AI to integrate it with machine learning. And then worked in a startup with augmented reality. So again, it's very, very different. Started mechanical engineering, biomedical engineering, more augmented reality, and I'm currently a PhD student in aerospace working on spacesuits. So it's a very, very diverse background.
And I think you summarized it probably too quickly, because we could have spoken another half an hour about all the amazing things you're doing. And besides the fact that I really want to know how to build a spacesuit, and but maybe we'll keep that for another day. But I think you are embodying this spirit of interdisciplinarity like no many others do. And for those of you who are still missing, Sara has been the first Arab woman in space, and a very accomplished sort of startup founder and engineer, and sort of it's an incredible array of talents in one place. And what I was interested to talk about today was space, and I wanted to start with a question that I guess it's about your journey, and sort of what was it like before space and after space.
No, definitely. A couple years ago, I got selected by a company called Space for Humanity. And it's the first program that selects astronauts that's not government-based. So usually how you're used to having astronauts in the world is where you have governments selecting astronauts, you have NASA selecting US citizens, you have the European Space Agency selecting European space citizens, only those who are partaking in the European Space Agency. And then you have UAE now, who has their own astronauts as well. So we're used to only having governmental astronauts, but that's currently changing. And I was part of the first citizen astronaut program, which is the only one of its kind, where you don't have to have a specific passport in order to go to space. So that was the first unique selling point here, where for the very first time my passport did not limit me. And I got selected out of 4,000 applicants from all over the world. They only select one person per year. And they sent me to space 2 years ago. And I became the first Egyptian astronaut and the first Arab woman and the first African woman to go to space. And since then, everything has definitely changed. The purpose of this mission was to analyze something called the overview effect, which is the change that happens to your brain when you see Earth from space. And definitely, as an engineer, I was a little bit skeptical as to how much that is actually going to change you, right? Like, I think we hear a lot of astronauts talk about it. We hear a lot of people talk about how beautiful it is to see Earth from space. Not a lot of people, of course. Like, it's just the very few that have gone to space and have been able to see it. And what I noticed before going was that I had never heard anyone from my side of the world talk about it. It was only anyone from either the US or Europe or Russia that had talking about it. So it was a very interesting thing, because it wasn't something that I thought would, be different, but it ended up being very different, because I think the overview effect, which is why we got sent to space and why something that we're trying to analyze and trying to really collect data points on, and we have only so far 2 people that are part of this program. And it is very, very different. It does break your reality. It does give you a new perspective on the world. It does change your understanding of what is, basically. And as an engineer, when I came back, I had to break it down into bullet points, just as you do everything. And I think a lot of people here would relate into how important it is to have lists and bullet points and like really organize yourself in a table format. And for me, it was really, I did exactly the same thing to analyze something that is so difficult to put into words. I'm not a poet. I'm not an artist. I'm not, someone who finds the words easily to explain herself. I'm not an emotional person, so it's really difficult to put into words. But I've been trying ever since then to do that. And there's a few points here that, in my way to try to explain, is that when you see Earth from space, you get this new understanding of everything around you. You get this understanding of how interconnected we are as human beings, what your connection is to Earth and your responsibility towards it, and your connection to the universe as well. I've heard astronauts talk about, not seeing the lines on the map before they went to space, and after coming back, like really looking at the world very differently. Because, when you're from the West, you don't face the same things as you do when you're not from there. I grew up in Egypt, so for me it was really, it's a very, very different background. And a lot of people here also, grew up in the Middle East too, so they could relate. Where when I got interested in the space field at the very beginning, I was not allowed to apply to the opportunities that existed just because of my passport. Even if I qualified to every little thing and the requirements that existed, I was not allowed to apply to it. I was not allowed to have access to the data. So it's very different when you have your passport that creates these limitations. And that's why I started the non-profit Deep Space Initiative that does exactly that. What it's trying to do is give people access to the space field by providing opportunities in research education to everyone around the world, regardless of your nationality or your resources or your gender. So we don't look at that. We just look at what's in your CV. What do you bring to the table? And I think that's the most important thing. And for me, I wish that was the case my whole life, that people would judge me based on my work and nothing else. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in, that's not the case. So at Deep Space Initiative, we used to do that. So for me, I started Deep Space Initiative before going to space. So that was something that was always important to me. That was always something that I've been trying to fight. So going to space didn't really change that part of me because it just reinforced it. Because that was something that I knew was a problem before going. So that's one point. But another thing is that then you develop a sense of responsibility towards humanity, that you have to take action when you do see injustice. You have to speak out about things. You do develop a voice that matters. And then you have a responsibility towards Earth too, because when you're up there, you see this very thin blue line, and that's the only thing protecting Earth from space. And you realize how fragile it really is. But just like how powerful this atmosphere is. It's so thin and so fragile, but it's so powerful in how it protects Earth. We're the same too. We are very fragile. We're human beings. We get sick. We can fall and break our legs. But I think we don't really sit down and think about how powerful our impact is on Earth, either negative or positive. So I think it's your responsibility to look at it and think, what type of impact do I want to have with your life here on Earth? And I think it is a lot more powerful than you think it could be. So there is that sense of things where when you sit down and try to process things and try to put it into words and try to analyze why you are feeling the way you are, I think that for me is how I've explained the Oreo effect. And then another point is that in the regular way that we talk, in any language, you always say that we're going to space, right? You're going into space when we already are there. So the way we're describing space travel or leaving Earth is a little bit misleading too, because we are already in space. We're not going anywhere. We're just leaving Earth. So I think once you're on a rocket and you leave Earth, and it just takes you a couple of minutes to leave Earth, and you see this darkness, and you're already outside of Earth, outside of everything that you've ever known. For the very first time, you're not within these walls anymore, and it's really weird. It's something that your brain has literally not biologically evolved to experience. So it makes sense for it to break your reality a little bit, because it's not meant to be out there, because we haven't evolved to be there. But it doesn't mean that we're not meant to be there. So also that's the little point that I think I want to finish up this explanation with, was that we as human beings, or a lot of people for us that work in the space field, we always get asked the question like, why are we going to space? Why are we spending so much money to go into space and not solving the problems we have here on Earth? And a lot of people say like, oh, we're spending billions, we're trying to escape Earth, we're trying to go and colonize another planet and just like leave Earth, but that's not what we're trying to do. There's so many things that we use every single day in our lives. Every single person, every single one of you is benefiting from space tech. Literally every single one of you. And it's something that we don't realize, how dependent we are on space tech and on us having presence in space. That I think is something that is really, really important to communicate, because we cannot live anymore in the quality of light that you need to live in. When you want to know what the weather what the weather is, you want to be warned before something bad happens so that you can evacuate. You want to find guidance on where to go, use GPS, and so many others. A lot of things in medicine have been initially created for space that we're using now in medicine. A lot of things like memory foam, actually, pens, parts of the space shuttle that have been used you've been used for heart transplants, so many different things. So it's really something that's been so incredibly useful that we don't really tend to think about. And then another thing is that our connection with the universe. I think that's something that we don't really think about, but as human beings, we've been moving around continent to continent, trying to explore, trying to understand. And for me, that's how it started. It started from wanting to understand our origins and understand the world. And going to space helps us have that better understanding. And I think that's...
Nothing short of life-changing, I would say. Yes. Thank you. I love the breadth of experiences that... And the sort of the way in which your perspective shifted also, I think it's very interesting. Obviously, it's hard to imagine for those who haven't. I mean, personally, I had the privilege of being on an Antarctic expedition, and certainly being to Antarctica was one of the most incredible experiences. It was very grounding experiences, especially crossing the Drake's Passage. But it was. But it still, I think, doesn't really give you that perspective that you're talking about, and I think it's very interesting. And you mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to sort of elevate in our discussion that are very important. This idea of how dependent we are on what happens above our heads, and also how difficult it is to access this space, and. When we had our conversations before, I want to quote you this beautiful question that was asked in our conversation, which was, why limit the limitless? So why are we limiting the limitless?
I think the answer to the why comes for a lot of reasons. The why is difficult because it depends on who has the power, who has the finances. And if you don't have the power, if you don't have your finances, or if you look a certain way that you don't have, then you are, in essence, being limited, because people want to take advantage of those who don't have power. And I think we're seeing that, and we've been seeing that since the beginning of time, right? We've seen how old white men have sat down in a meeting room and drawn lines on a map and separated countries. That's exactly it. They have limited the people. But I think we constantly are seeing that again and again. So the question for why we are doing that is a really difficult question. And I think it comes from, in essence, why we have inequality, why we have injustice, why we have racism, why we have apartheid, why we have all of that. So the why is a really, really difficult question. But what can we do about it? I think that's the thing that, each one of us has to ask ourselves. What can you do about what you're seeing in the world? For us, what we decided to do, my team and I, is really try to combat that by trying to erase those borders one step at a time. So what we did was that everything that we had been facing, whenever we felt that we were not able to access these opportunities, we created them. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs here know what that's like too, where you're seeing a problem that's not being addressed and you're creating it. right? You're creating and then you're providing at the same time opportunities for others to be working in that. So Deep Space Initiative does exactly that. So it does provide those opportunities. And it's also working on the legal side of things too. Because what makes it inaccessible? It's the legal, it's the law, or the laws. You know, when we're talking about space, there are a lot of laws that have been put in place during the Cold War between the US and the USSR that have made everything related to tech, anything related to innovation, anything related to something that's really useful, that could be used for military, inaccessible to those who are not part of that country because of national interest, of course. Everything is related to national interest at the end of the day. But now it's very, very different because they have all of these other uses that are so important for the rest of humanity, that it's not only about military, it's not only about national interest, it's about the interest of all of humanity. And we need to be collaborating with one another rather than looking at competing between different countries for these reasons. Definitely national interest is important. So it's not to, you can't really do things in order and then harm your own national interests. So that's not what we're saying. We're not asking countries to sacrifice themselves. That's not at all what we're asking, and that's not something that is even realistic. So that's not it at all, but we're asking that to look at the long-term picture. And I think Emirates, actually, we were having a conversation about that yesterday in a meeting with some people that are really working on the vision for the Emirates, and how their leadership, because it's very constant, because it's very stable, they are able to plan ahead for many, many decades without having to look at, what's going to get me to win this election right now. So when you have actually governments that are not looking at winning the election or staying in power or just getting the votes, you have a very different agenda. You don't have this agenda of, how do I make this for myself? And that's what I'm constantly seeing all over the world. So I think we were having this conversation as well, that's like questioning what works and what doesn't. Everything around us is an experiment. All of the ideologies that we've been having since, the beginning of time, like whether it be empires or the democracy or communism or all of that, we don't know what works and what doesn't. We're just constantly experimenting, and then we're collecting the data ourselves, and then no one is happy. But I think what works and what we know works, and I think what benefits everyone, is having a vision that is long-term. Because I think everything that's bad that has happened in the world has come from a short-term vision. With everything that's going on with climate, everything that's going on with oppression, everything that's going on everywhere has been, how do we benefit right now and not look at the repercussions of it? When you're designing a robot, you're designing any system, you have to look at all the parts that are connected to one another. You can't design a system that works here and then harms the other part of it, and next to it, right? That would just not work. It has to be beneficial for both parties. And I think that's how we should be looking at international collaboration and how we govern, countries, or how we govern people. We can't be leading people without looking at the long-term vision. So I know I completely diverged from the question.
That's okay. Well, we're still trying to talk about space and why it's important for everyone, I guess, which I think is a fair point. And we have to look at. I don't know the extent to which, in your conversations, the idea of the commons has ever been applied to space, but
it is, yeah.
It's just it's another concept. But at the same time, the amount of research and effort and investment required, which you are aware of, requires a certain effort, requires a certain organization, and so I think what's really important for us is also to understand what are the technologies that are so important for us and that are dependent on our access to space. I wonder, in your experience, what have you come to also see as the sort of crucial technologies, and maybe also what impact are they having on Earth? Because we see a lot of we have conversations about advanced materials here, which I'm sure in your field of developing suits and is very important. But also I'm sure that sending someone up there involves quite an incredible amount of computing, and it's also an interesting aspect, and a lot of what is being developed in terms of communication, computing, materials is also finding its way back on Earth. I wonder what in your mind are the most significant technologies that are being developed for space that will have an impact on us today?
That's a really good question, and we could talk about all the research that's going on, and it would take forever. And I think there's so much research being done in space and being used on Earth. And I think as a biomedical engineer, I would kind of be a little bit biased towards that, because like it benefits the human being like directly. And I think other than in space manufacturing, we had a presentation yesterday from one of our teams that won the competition with the Dubai Future Forum. We partnered with the Dubai Future Forum and sent one of our teams here to Dubai for the very first time, and we announced the winners yesterday. So it was really, really exciting, and they got to present their work. And it was about in-space manufacturing, where they were studying semiconductors and optical fibers and how different they are when they're manufactured in space compared to when they're manufactured on Earth. And to give you a little bit of context, optical fibers are used for underwater, for internet, to connect internet underwater. And you need it to be with specific properties in order for it to be used. And I think if you have better materials, you'd have better connectivity, you'd have better everything, right? The pricing, the everything. Semiconductors, I think everyone knows semiconductors as well. They're on your phones, they're everywhere. And now with AI and with everything that's going on, the demand is just so much higher. So what if you can manufacture it better? What if you get it cheaper? What if you get the correlation that you need in terms of the material properties that are required for your application, right? You can really manipulate it in the way that you want by manufacturing it in space. Right? So I think there's a lot of things here that are very relevant that we're using every single day, especially when we're talking about these specific fields, when we're talking about the fields that we're really developing now that have such a long-term impact in the future, but also on the medical side, where a lot of things that happen to you, to your physiology in space, happens at a much rapid pace than when it happens to you on Earth. Everyone is going to age, hopefully. And when you age, you get bone loss, so you have bone demineralization. And as you age, also you get muscle atrophy, which means you lose muscle mass and you lose bone mass. And when that happens, the exact same things that happens to you in space, but really quickly. Because in microgravity, you don't have forces telling your bones to reproduce cells. So you have two different types of cells, osteoblasts and osteoclasts, and they keep regenerating. But one of them goes on overdrives because the other one is not having any signals telling it to produce more. So you have only one constantly eating up your bones, and it happens much faster. And this is actually what happens to you also as you age. So we're all going to face this problem. We're all going to have more hollow bones, basically, just to put it in a very simple term. And what if we can find a solution for that? So you develop pharmaceuticals, you develop techniques in space, and you test them out on the people that are there quickly, so that you're able to solve these problems here on Earth. So many other examples you have for bones, for muscles, for your vestibular system, for your ocular system, you have for your cardiovascular system. So many different systems in the human body that you can test in space in a controlled environment and then apply them for different medical issues that you have here on Earth. So I think those for me are really, really interesting. That's kind of like what I worked on as well, so that's why it's really interesting.
I mean, it's an incredible lab up there. It's a slightly expensive commute, but I guess it's really an incredible opportunity, I think, that we have to test things in ways that we couldn't test them here. Thank you for that perspective. I think we want to use the last few minutes to open it up to the floor for questions, if there are any. Please.
Hello. You participated in a suborbital mission. Do you like fly again on high orbit or maybe Mars if Elon Musk invite you?
If I get called onto a mission tomorrow, I would go. Yes, I'm still training and I'm still hoping to go again. So you never know. I got selected, and and then I got the news that I would be going to space 2 weeks before my last mission. I had been training for a year and a half before that. You don't need this much training for a suborbital flight. They're trying to make it more accessible, but I had been training for it because I still want to go again, and I'm still continuing my training. And yeah, my goal is to retire on Mars. Yes, so yes.
I have a question.
We have one more. Hi. Hey, Bobby.
Yeah, so you said something I thought was kind of interesting when you were talking about the overview effect, and you said it doesn't mean that we're not meant to be there. And that wording sounded like it was implying something like it's almost our cosmic destiny to expand into space. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
I love this question because that's how it all started for me. I was going through a sort of existential crisis, like I think a lot of us go through. And for me, I didn't grow up thinking about space. It wasn't something that I was exposed to at all. There was no astronauts from our side of the world. There was nothing, no rocket launches, nothing. So it's not something I was dreaming about. So it came from exactly that, from wondering where we're heading as humans, where we came from. And I had a lot of questions about the world. And for me, one of the ways that we can have those answers is by pushing humanity to become multiplanetary so that we have the technology to have those answers. So it just really, for me, why I got into space was to answer exactly that. And then when I did go there, the connection that you feel towards the universe, it all clicked. For me, it's in our DNA to want to continue moving forward, to continue, like, as human beings. If there's a lot of experiments that are being done on rats, and like I know that we're not exactly like rats, but we can actually deduce some information from them. But if you remove all the problems from rats, give them all the food that they need, their society will crumble after a few generations. So I think as human beings, we do need chaos. We do need to be moving forward. Otherwise, we will not be able to, I don't think we'll be able to survive as human beings. So we need to be constantly moving forward. We need to be constantly pushing the boundaries. We need to be constantly really looking ahead. And going to space is just I'm not going to say the most obvious choice, but I think it's what humanity should be doing, just because we've constantly been doing forever. And that's the I don't know, like, it's this, I'm not going to say smooth, I'm having trouble finding the word, like, it's not obvious and it's not smooth, because they're not obvious and smooth, but they kind of are. Like, I think that's...
Is it a natural progression?
Natural progression, yes, that's the word that I'm trying. Because smooth and obvious are not the words that you should be describing for this. But yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more question? Amazing, thank you.
Did you experience anything spiritual during your journey in space or when you came back? And also, did you observe anything? You know, there's all these questions about other forms of life that are out there. Was there any spiritual, or did you observe anything that was surprising to you while you were in space?
Right now, we don't have any proof of any other life. We do the math. We try to understand the probability of having other life. For me, I can't say that there is or there isn't. But like, I think it's just, you kind of like look at the data and you kind of like try to see, and the data not being any observations, because there is no proof of that. So as of right now, for the data that we have right now, there is nothing, right? But it doesn't mean that we have enough data to see, right? So right now, we don't know. So we don't know if there is anything. That's the correct answer. We can't say that there is or there isn't, because I think because of the scale of the whole universe, it would be very arrogant for us to think that we're the only living beings. The math doesn't add up either. Everything is really random. Human beings are not that significant. We're not that special. But we are special in a way where we are asking these questions and trying to have that understanding. So we are trying to give meaning to everything. So I think that's how it makes us a little bit more special. But as being alive, we're not that special. But as for the spiritual side, I think for me, it's not when you're there that you feel the spiritual side. And I think it's not really the spiritual side as much as, your perspective, your understanding of the world. For me, it broke my reality. It broke my understanding of the world. And you have to put it back together. And I think the process of putting it back together and really trying to allow that to influence you, because you can just also block it and not allow it to influence you, but because my mission was to analyze that. We did have to go through a lot of training before spaceflight and after spaceflight to really allow it to for us to be able to process it. We have a lot of NASA astronauts on the board also that, you know, they always say, whenever I speak to other astronauts, they say like, oh, I wish I had this type of training too, you know, because it's a very unique training that we go through where we don't, you know, just completely ignore it, basically. It's about not ignoring it, I think.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have time for one more question? No. In that case, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your perspectives with us, and thank you for your questions as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.